Every clock is lying to you. Right now, time is bending in ways you can't feel. The past is closer than it looks, and a second isn't a second everywhere. Stick around, because fact number 7 makes Cleopatra almost impossible to believe. Let's break your sense of time. Picture this. While Star Wars packed cinemas and Apple was just being born, France still had an executioner sharpening a medieval blade. The guillotine, invented during the Revolution of 1789, was meant to be a humane, egalitarian death. But here's the twist, it never went away. Long after other nations abandoned public beheadings, France kept using it, quietly, behind prison walls. The last man executed was Hamida Jandoubi, killed in Marseille on September 10, 1977. That's the same year the first Star Wars premiered, and the year Elvis Presley died. France didn't abolish the death penalty entirely until 1981. So while millions watched lightsabers glow on screen, a real blade was still falling in a French prison courtyard. The space age and the guillotine, overlapping in living memory. Sometimes the past isn't nearly as far away as we think. Here's a fact that scrambles your sense of time. When you think of Nintendo, you picture pixels, plumbers, and plastic controllers. But this company is stunningly old. Nintendo was founded on September 23, 1889, in Kyoto, Japan, not making video games, but hand-painted playing cards called Hanafuda. Now look at Paris. The Eiffel Tower, that timeless icon of modern engineering, opened its doors on March 31, 1889. Do the math. Nintendo already existed when the Eiffel Tower was brand new. In fact, both share the same birth year, but Nintendo's roots stretch through 2 centuries of reinvention. The same company that sold paper cards to Kyoto gamblers later gave us Mario, Zelda, and the Switch. So next time you game, remember, you're holding a piece of 19th century history. Here's a fact that'll rearrange your brain. Sharks are older than trees. Picture Earth 450 million years ago. The oceans already teemed with ancient sharks, gliding through prehistoric seas, hunting long before anything resembling a forest existed. Back then, the land was bare, no towering trunks, no leafy canopies, just moss and bare rock. The first real trees didn't appear until around 385 million years ago, when a plant called Archaeopteris finally stretched skyward. Do the math. Sharks had already been swimming for roughly 65 million years before the first tree ever took root. They survived 5 mass extinctions, outlasting the dinosaurs by a mile. So the next time you lean against an oak, remember, the shark's bloodline is older than the very concept of wood. Trees are the newcomers. Sharks were here first, and they're still here. Picture 1830 Scotland, decades before the first gas engine roars to life. Robert Anderson builds a crude electric carriage, a battery, a motor, no gasoline in sight. Around 1832, this Scottish inventor rolls out one of history's first electric vehicles. Meanwhile, Carl Benz wouldn't patent his gasoline-powered motor wagon until 1886, over 50 years later. By 1900, electric cars were everywhere. Nearly a third of American vehicles ran on batteries, quiet and clean while gas cars sputtered and stank. New York City even had electric taxis humming through its streets. So here's the twist. The technology we call the future of driving is actually the past. Electric came first, then gasoline muscled in for a century. We didn't invent the electric car, we reinvented it. The future of transportation was already parked in a garage nearly 200 years ago. Picture 1843. No telephones, no light bulbs, no cars. Yet a Scottish inventor named Alexander Bain just patented a machine that could send images across a wire. He called it the electric printing telegraph, but you'd recognize it instantly. It was the fax machine. Bain used swinging pendulums and metal type to scan a message and reproduce it on chemically treated paper at the other end. Improvements followed, and by 1865 a fax service was already running between Paris and Lyon. Now here's the twist. Alexander Graham Bell didn't patent the telephone until 1876, a full 33 years later. So the next time an office fax machine jams and someone jokes it's ancient technology, remember, it's older than the telephone, older than the light bulb, and older than almost every gadget you own. Picture America's oldest university teaching students before calculus even existed. Harvard was founded in 1636, in a Massachusetts colony barely 16 years old. Its first students studied Latin, Greek, logic, and rhetoric by candlelight. But here's the twist. The mathematics we now consider fundamental hadn't been invented yet. Isaac Newton wouldn't be born until 1642, 6 years after Harvard opened its doors. And calculus, the tool Newton and Leibniz would develop, didn't emerge until the 1660s and 1680s. That means Harvard had already graduated dozens of classes before anyone could compute a derivative. A university older than the math taught in every freshman engineering course today. Think about that. Students walked Harvard Yard for nearly 50 years before the equations of change were ever written down. Picture a farmer near Wrangel Island. No, picture the wheel already turning while mammoths still walked the earth. Here's the twist. Woolly mammoths didn't all vanish in the Ice Age. On Wrangel Island, off Siberia's coast, a tiny herd survived, isolated and shrinking. They finally died out around 1650 BCE, roughly 4,000 years ago. Meanwhile, the wheel was invented near 3,500 BCE in Mesopotamia. The Great Pyramid of Giza arose around 2,560 BCE. So while Egyptians hauled stone on rolling carts and pharaohs ruled a golden age, actual mammoths were still breathing, grazing frozen tundra. The math is staggering. Mammoths outlasted the wheel by nearly 2,000 years. Wait, what? Wheels, writing, and pyramids all existed while living mammoths roamed. History isn't a straight line. Sometimes the ancient and the impossibly old overlap. Picture the last woolly mammoth, still breathing while the pyramids already cast their shadows. It sounds impossible, but the timeline is real. The Great Pyramid of Giza rose around 2560 BC. Its final stones set by workers who never imagined an Ice Age creature still roamed the earth. Because far to the north, on tiny Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean, a shrunken population of woolly mammoths clung to life. They didn't vanish until about 1650 BC, roughly 9 centuries after Giza was finished. That means for nearly 1,000 years, mammoths and pyramids shared the same planet, the same sky, the same slow turning of time. So while Egyptian priests mummified their pharaohs, actual living mammoths were trudging across frozen tundra. The Ice Age and the Pyramid Age weren't separate chapters. They overlapped. Picture making a video call, but the year is 1936. Long before Zoom, before the internet, before television was in homes, Nazi Germany opened the world's first public videophone service. The Deutsche Reichspost launched it in March 1936, linking special booths in Berlin and Leipzig post offices. You'd sit before a screen, watch the person on the other end, and talk face-to-face across 200 miles. By 1938, the network stretched to Nuremberg, Munich, and Hamburg. A 3-minute call cost around 3.5 Reichsmark. Pricey, but real. Thousands of citizens actually used it. So while your grandparents' generation is pictured writing letters, Germans in 1936 were already staring into glowing screens, waving at faces hundreds of miles away. Video calling isn't a modern miracle. It's nearly 90 years old. Here's a collision of eras that feels impossible. When Gustav Eiffel's Iron Tower opened in 1889, Paris dazzled the world with electric light and modern engineering. Yet just beyond the celebrations, the guillotine, that grim invention of the 1789 revolution, was still busy. It kept falling through the Belle Époque, through 2 world wars, through the Jazz Age, and the Atomic Age. France's last public beheading happened in 1939, watched by a crowd holding cameras. And the very last guillotine execution? September 1977, the same year Apple was founded and Star Wars hit theaters. So the blade of the revolution and the tower of the future stood together for 88 years. Somewhere, a condemned man met a medieval death while a spaceship-age monument glittered on the horizon. 2 Francis, 1 skyline, impossibly coexisting. Here's something that'll break your brain. Canned food fed armies and explorers for nearly 50 years before anyone invented a proper tool to open it. In 1810, Englishman Peter Durand patented the tin can, sealing meat and vegetables inside thick iron walls. But how did people open them? With hammers, chisels, and even bayonets. Soldiers stabbed their dinner. One label actually read, "Cut round the top near the outer edge with a chisel and hammer." The can opener wasn't patented until 1858 by American Ezra Warner, and the familiar rotating wheel version arrived in 1870. So for decades, humanity had perfectly preserved food locked inside metal it could barely crack open. We solved food storage before we solved food access. Sometimes invention runs backwards. The container arrives, and the key shows up 48 years late. Picture students hurrying to lectures at Oxford, centuries before anyone laid a single stone in Tenochtitlan. Teaching began at Oxford University around 1096, and it exploded after 1167, when England's King Henry II banned scholars from studying in Paris, sending them home. By 1249, Oxford had residential colleges, libraries, and robed masters debating philosophy. Now travel across the Atlantic. The mighty Aztec Empire? Its capital, Tenochtitlan, wasn't founded until 1325, over 200 years later. Montezuma wouldn't be born for generations. So when Aztec priests were first building their pyramids on a swampy lake, Oxford was already a mature, world-famous institution graduating its umpteenth class. Here's the mind-bender. Oxford is older than the Aztec Empire, older than the Inca, even older than the notion of England having a parliament. History isn't a straight line, it's gloriously tangled. Picture Cleopatra gazing up at the Great Pyramid. Here's the twist that breaks your brain. The pyramids of Giza were completed around 2560 BC, ancient monuments already crumbling with age. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was born in 69 BC and died in 30 BC. That means roughly 2,500 years separated her from the builders who stacked those colossal stones. To Cleopatra, the pyramids were as distant and mysterious as she is to us. Now look forward. The Apollo 11 moon landing happened in 1969, about 1,999 years after her death. Do the math. Cleopatra lived nearly 500 years closer to Neil Armstrong bouncing on lunar dust than to the pyramids rising from the desert sand. The queen we call ancient was practically our neighbor. Time is so much stranger and so much bigger than we ever imagine. Picture a Tyrannosaurus rex staring up at a Stegosaurus fossil, because to the T-Rex, that Stegosaurus was already ancient history. We tend to imagine all dinosaurs living together, roaming the same swamps. But they didn't. The Stegosaurus, with its iconic back plates, vanished around 150 million years ago, in the late Jurassic. The mighty T-Rex didn't appear until roughly 68 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous. That leaves a staggering gap of about 82 million years between them. Now here's the twist. The T-Rex went extinct just 66 million years ago. Do the math. The distance separating you from the last T-Rex is smaller than the distance separating the T-Rex from the Stegosaurus. So the next time someone lumps all dinosaurs together, remember, they lived in worlds unimaginably far apart in time. Picture this: humanity's first airplane and the theory that bent time itself, born almost together. In December 1903, on the windswept dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, Orville Wright lifted off for 12 seconds and 120 feet. The whole world had just learned that humans could fly. Then, barely 18 months later, in 1905, a young patent clerk named Albert Einstein published his paper on special relativity. He redefined space, time, and light forever. So while the Wright brothers were still figuring out how to stay airborne for a full minute, Einstein was already explaining why time slows down as you approach the speed of light. The same era that struggled to leave the ground was quietly rewriting the universe. 2 years, 2 revolutions, one impossibly small gap between crawling and cosmic. So the past wasn't as far away as you thought, and no clock ever told you the truth. If your brain feels a little rewired, subscribe, because next time, we go even deeper into the impossible. Now go check that clock again, it's still lying.